Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, New Approaches to Serving Our Communities, Social Enterprise. My name is Lily Cavanaugh and I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Latino Affairs Commission, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. Thank you for being with us today. Today you will hear a presentation from Alan Proctor on this very important subject. But before we get started, let's take a moment to ensure that everyone is ready. In order to get to know our audience today, we would appreciate it if you can respond to a very short survey. Please find on the top of your screen the icon grid and select Showcase. A screen will open on the right and you will click on the link Survey as you see on the slide. When you finish your survey, simply close that tab and it will return you to the presentation. I want to give you a moment now to get familiar with the screens that you will be using during our presentation today. Also, I wanted to remind you that today you will have the ability to submit questions using the chat pane, which is located on the right side of the screen. To access it, again, I will need you to go back to the icon grid and select the option Q&A. Please take a minute to find that icon in your screen. We will make sure to keep track of all of the questions and try to answer all of those at the end of the presentation. However, if there is a relevant question that requires response a little bit sooner, we will make sure to stop and take care of that question then. So now that you're a little bit more familiar with the format of the presentation, let's move on to the next section. I also wanted to let you know that in case you're having issues with the sound in your computer, you can also join via conference call, and the phone number is appearing right now on your screens, 641-715-3200. The participant code will be 954504#. If you have the need to access this mode of audio, please make sure to mute your phone once you have accessed the conference call. Additionally, we will make sure to record and make available this presentation on our website for future viewing. As always, for more information, you can reach us out at the Ohio Latino Affairs Commission or visit us on our website. If you have a question that cannot be answered at this time or you want help accessing the presentation, call 614-466-8333. And with that, once again, I want to give you the welcome for joining us today for this important webinar. The Ohio Latino Affairs Commission is the state agency that has three key mandates: to advise the governor and the legislature on issues impacting Latino Ohioans, to connect the diverse Latino organizations and communities across the state, and to build capacity. So moving on to the most important part of why we're here today, I have the pleasure of introducing you to our presenter, Mr. Alan Proctor. He will be speaking to us about new approaches to serving our community's social enterprise. Mr. Proctor is the founder and the principal of Proctor's Linking Mission to Money. He has nearly 30 years of experience evaluating the financial health of organizations, developing effective business strategies, and enhancing organizational effectiveness. At the Commission, we have had the pleasure of working with Mr. Proctor throughout this year, and we're very impressed with the work and the innovative solution that he is able to bring to nonprofit organizations and his deep understanding of the challenges that nonprofits are facing in regards to their performance. So we are very pleased to have him today with us. He has a lot of experience dealing and working with boards, dealing with the financial restructuring, strategic planning, board relations, government and media relations, technology, and the process of re-engineering. So all of those are very important attributes that will really help him understand and work well with you as we explore how can Latino organizations become more sustainable in the near future. It is an honor for me to introduce you all to Mr. Alan Proctor. Thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing from you on our Q&A session.
Thank you, Lily. It's really a privilege and an honor to be able to introduce this exciting topic of social enterprise to the Latino community. What we're going to be talking about today is this new approach to trying to have a nonprofit become financially sustainable. In the next hour, we're going to talk about why social enterprise is needed, frankly, what it is, how others are developing ideas for social enterprises, and how you can get help in order to develop your own idea. But let me first start with a couple of stories about why social enterprise has become a much more common topic of discussion. Let me talk to you about David. David runs a nonprofit, and he got a grant for $300,000. Terrifically large grant. We'd all love to get that. But the grant required him to start a new program. You can see him at the ribbon cutting. Has somewhat mixed feelings about cutting that ribbon because the program actually cost him $600,000. Now, this is a situation we often run into in the nonprofit world. We get a grant that gives us less money than the cost of providing the program. It may not be as huge a difference as David encountered, but often they won't pay us for running our offices, compiling the reports that are required, or all of that. But what are our options? Do we reject the grant and not do the project? Do we go ahead and try to reallocate our other fundraising to see if we can bring money into covering that? Or do we end up in the situation David ended up, where he lost $300,000 by accepting this grant? There are other stories that lead to the same kind of dilemmas for nonprofits. Maybe Judy's dilemma is yours. Judy provides extensive job training programs through contracts with the state of Ohio. However, the state budget cuts in the last few years have reduced her reimbursement rate. So now it no longer covers the cost of running her program. Should she scale back the program to just serve the number of clients it can fund? Should she try to find new grants to make up the difference and go ahead with it? Or is she going to persist with the status quo and lose money and jeopardize her overall nonprofit? Well, these are two stories, but it certainly isn't the picture for just one or two. In fact, it's the picture for the majority of nonprofits that we face. There's a survey that's done every year. It's national, but they break it down by state. And they ask a very important question. In 2013, they asked the nonprofits, are you having more and more demanded from your nonprofit? And they asked the same question in 2014. Are people still wanting you to do more? And in fact, the vast majority, over 75% of the nonprofits in Ohio in that survey said, we're being asked to do more. But then here was the key question. Do you have the resources to be able to do more? And what they found in both 2013 and 2014 was the majority of nonprofits couldn't do it. So David's situation and Judy's situation actually are representative of the majority of nonprofits that are around. But I'm sure you're well aware of all the challenges. One of the most well-known publications in the nonprofit world is the Chronicle of Philanthropy. And on the slide you're looking at here are just a few of the headlines that have been appearing. What do those headlines tell us? It tells us there's doubt and questions about nonprofits. They're getting pressure from donors that the donors are increasingly putting conditions on their gifts. They're even complaining about nonprofits not being efficient. The traditional solution to these stresses has been, well, we will hire another fundraiser to raise money, or we will mount a campaign to try to make up the difference. But the next chart I'm going to show you is a chart that changed my mind about where we could find the solutions. This is a chart that shows in a nonprofit's budget, what percentage of that budget is covered by charitable contributions. Now, this chart goes back to 1985, and it says for almost 30 years, fundraising has been a flat as a slice of the pie in the nonprofit budget. And it's also been a fairly small slice. Now, it varies by sector, but the only two sectors of the nonprofit world that are primarily funded by charitable contributions are K through 12 education and the cultural sector. The rest of the nonprofit sector, that is most of the nonprofit sector, actually get most of their money by selling goods or services directly to clients or through contracts with foundations or with governments. Now, with that limitation and this pressure on nonprofits, we have another aspect to the problem. The donors are in a pickle. They see the long lines outside their door, and they're quite aware that you, the nonprofits, need more revenue. But the reality for the donors is there are already more nonprofits asking them for money than the donors have, whether we're talking about foundations, companies, or individuals. What donors really want is a way to help a nonprofit earn its own money so they aren't totally dependent on the same check from the same donor year after year after year. They call this teaching nonprofits how to fish. Well, that's easy to say, but as a nonprofit, you have your own dilemma. And what is that? Well, you're a business. So you have to be profitable overall to be sustainable, because if you aren't profitable, you lose money. And you all know that you can only lose money for so many years before you're fundamentally going bankrupt. But here's the real dilemma for you. You became a 501c3 charitable organization, what we unfortunately call a nonprofit. You became a 501c3 because there's something that our community needs to be done that can't break even or make money. That's why the private sector can't do it. So we created all of these special tax privileges to try to help nonprofits be able to provide their key mission services. Many of you don't pay income taxes. You're usually exempt from sales taxes, and in most cases exempt from property taxes. People who donate money to you get a tax write-off. But you saw from the previous chart that all those incentives still aren't enough to cover all of the bills that it takes to do what you need to do. So what does a nonprofit do if it has to be profitable yet has to do something that loses money? You have to do something that makes money. And it sounds so obvious, but actually it's a relatively new realization in the nonprofit world. So in order to do that, I describe a successful nonprofit as one that consists of having two sides to its business. There's the side that loses money, what I call the mission-oriented side, and there has to be a side that actually makes money. And social entrepreneurship is the word that is now being used for-profit businesses that are intended to create a social impact. Now, this is a hard concept to develop. So I'm supposed to make sure I may lose money on something, but at the same time make sure I make money on something else. That sounds like doing two businesses. Well, I'm going to go through a fair number of examples to help you kind of understand this balancing act of having a dual business model. And as I go through this, I'm sure questions are going to come up. So be sure to write your questions in the chat window and we'll address them at the end or as we go on if it's really pressing. So let's start with the really hard nut. You have to lose money at something. Now, we run into many dilemmas, and oftentimes what I find is it's your board of directors that has the hardest time in figuring out how to think about this. Let me talk to you about Jerry. Jerry Boren ran the Columbus Zoo. He's now retired, and there's a new man in place. But several years ago, he ran into a very critical example of how we need to lose money if we're going to deliver on our mission. The mission of the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium is not for you to visit the animals. The mission of the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium is the preservation of endangered species. And Jerry saw that 70 miles east of his zoo was a fascinating place called the Wilds. If you haven't been to the Wilds in Zanesville, you should think about it because it is the only location in the Western Hemisphere that is devoted to the preservation and propagation of the most endangered species in the world. Well, this is a key mission, conservation of species, so it should be no surprise to you that they were losing money. They could not raise enough charitable donations to cover all those bills. And Jerry realized that if the zoo was going to be true to its mission, it needed to actually take over the wilds and increase the losses that the zoo encountered. Kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? If I'm going to do what I need to do, but I want to be self-sustaining, I'm going to have to take on a new money-losing activity. But sometimes that's what we as nonprofits need to do. So we need to find the resources to be able to continue to do it. Well, sometimes we run into the real dilemma of what I call mission drift. What does that mean? Well, you get a grant. The grant tells you you have to accomplish a certain number of things, and you know that's going to be hard. Let me tell you about the problem Steve ran into. Steve runs a program for troubled youth. These are kids who come from very dysfunctional homes. There's no routine. Steve finds getting them to come to one counseling session a week is more structure than they had in their whole lives. And Steve was approached by a very generous donor who said, "Steve, I love your program, but I need to make sure that my contributions are used effectively. So I will fund your program if you can guarantee to me that you will get these kids going to school so much that they're only going to miss one day of school every 2 weeks. That's a 10% truancy rate." Well, this was a true dilemma for Steve because he knew that for his clients, such as this young lady on the slide, missing only one day of school per week was not going to be achievable. And if he were to accept that grant, he actually would not be able to accept the difficult clients like this young lady. And we as nonprofits run into this situation more often than we wished, that we pick the easier clients or the clients that are less expensive to serve in order to balance our budget. And that's not what we're supposed to do. So with these two challenges of we have to lose money, here we run into this issue of we're supposed to be profitable. So how do we do this? Well, let me give you some examples. Have you wondered what Jerry did when he took over the wilds? How he took care of that loss and made things balance? Well, he built a water park, Zumbezi Bay. I don't know if many of you have had a chance to go through that, but Zumbezi Bay is a for-profit subsidiary of the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium. It was built in order to generate enough profits to more than cover the losses of running the wilds out in Zanesville. And this is a very common thing to do. You probably have been to a Goodwill store. Goodwill stores are profit-making enterprises. They average profits of $1 million per year per store. And those profits are used to cover the costs of job training for disabled individuals that can't be covered by government contracts and charitable contributions. But you know what? You've seen this every day whenever you walk inside a hospital. In Columbus area, we have a hospital system called the Mount Carmel Health System. They have 4 locations: the New Albany Surgical Hospital, St. Anne's in Westerville, what they call Mount Carmel East in Gahanna, and Mount Carmel West in Franklinton, one of the poorest parts of the city of Columbus. The New Albany Surgical Hospital is illustrated on the left of your slide. In the last year of reporting, the profit margin at the New Albany Surgical Hospital was 31%. At St. Anne's in Westerville, the profit margin was 11%. But on the right side of your slide is a picture of Mount Carmel West in Franklinton. Not as fancy a hospital, does just as good a job taking care of people's health, but that is run it as a loss. Why? Because charity care and Medicaid and Medicare patients at Mount Carmel West are fairly high, whereas it's mostly self-paid and privately insured individuals at the New Albany Surgical Hospital. So they established a high margin location so that they could support a low margin location. So I've given you some examples of how people make money and why you have to really focus hard on making sure you are still doing your mission activity in a way that meets the needs of your community and won't cover its costs. And this is social enterprise or social entrepreneurship. And impact investing is the term for investing in a social enterprise. There's basically 3 kinds of social enterprises. The first kind, which is often run by a nonprofit, is a social enterprise that may or may not be doing something closely related to the mission, but its purpose is to raise profits so that they can supplement charitable contributions so the nonprofit can basically cover all of its expenses and have something extra to deal with any surprises or difficult times. This is an example of the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium. It has almost no relationship to the mission of animal conservation, but its profits are used to support animal conservation. The second kind of social enterprise is one where its impact often comes from who it employs. What we see starting up quite a bit around Ohio are social enterprises that focus on individuals that are very difficult to employ. Ex-felons, victims of human trafficking, the developmentally disabled, people who are on the autism spectrum are just a few of the examples of what's going on in this town. Homeless individuals are another category. The third type of social enterprise is a social enterprise that goes into a location where its sales just won't be as good as they can do. In this state, it hasn't gone too far. In Pennsylvania, it's made a lot of progress, but this is an area where oftentimes it's related to what we call food deserts, neighborhoods where there aren't any grocery stores where you can get fresh fruits and vegetables. And these are starting to begin here in Central Ohio. They're going into neighborhoods where they're going to sell fresh fruits and vegetables. They know they're not going to have sales as high as they can because you've got to teach people how to cook. You've got to give them recipes. You've got to encourage them to see the value of buying a fresh fruit and a vegetable versus the standard types of products we'd get at the typical mom and pop store. Kroger would never do this, but a social enterprise would. So, how do we think about this? Well, I'd like you to remember three words: place, person, and price. The only difference between making money in something and losing money is the place you choose to do it, the person you choose as your customer, and the price you charge. We as nonprofits usually started by the place being a low-income community, the people being people with very limited ability to pay, and the price was zero because we provided it through a grant, a contract with the government, and charitable contributions. But this is also the way to think about how to start a social enterprise. Let me talk to you about the Greater Cincinnati Energy Alliance. They're a nonprofit that began in order to do weatherization in low-income communities, what you see on the left side of your chart. They started the way many nonprofits started. They got a huge $13 million grant from the Federal Department of Energy to do weatherization for free. Well, they were thinking ahead and they said, you know, the need for weatherization is not going to disappear when our grant ended in 2013. We want to still have the ability to provide weatherization even without this huge grant. So they looked at what they did, and they realized that they had put together a very good inspection program to identify the weatherization needs in a building. They had put together a very good set of qualified contractors that could do good work on time. And they did post-work inspection to make sure that the weatherization standards were met and achieved. Well, they said, if I can do this in a low-income neighborhood for people who earn very little money and need me to do it for free, weatherization is still necessary in the higher-income suburbs of Cincinnati, where people have very high incomes and they can afford to pay a price that will be profitable for me. And they did. They did the very same activity on the right-hand side of your screen in order to earn profits to be able to continue to do what's on the left-hand side of your screen. And if you think that you're not sure everyone's doing this, we just surveyed the nonprofits in Central Ohio. And as this chart shows, the majority of nonprofits are either doing a social enterprise or they're actually thinking about it. 59% are actually running at least one social enterprise venture to earn profits to support their mission-critical, money-losing activities. And if you are not yet thinking about social enterprise, add social enterprise as an option in your strategic planning, or you may be left behind and facing the problems of declining charitable contributions, reduced government grants, and an inability to meet the needs of your community. But let me give you two more examples. In order to do that, I want to introduce you to this chart, what I call the linking mission to money grid. The horizontal, on this grid, we put the various activities of our organizations. On the horizontal dimension, you'll see high profit on the right-hand side and losses on the left. So something we do that makes money goes on the right-hand side. Something we do that loses money goes on the left-hand side. A for-profit business will only have activities on the right-hand side. It won't have anything on the left-hand side. But as a nonprofit, you have a more complicated business model. You have this vertical dimension of mission. If it's on the upper half of the table, it's an activity that really is very closely related to your mission, and it addresses a very strong community need. If it's low in the bottom half of it, it's something that's not really very related to your mission at all. And a nonprofit has to worry about which grid it's going to be in. Well, from what we talked about before, you know that you exist as a 501c3 charitable organization because you do something on the upper left-hand side, something that loses money but is very central to why you exist as an organization. Let me talk to you about Life Care Alliance, which is an organization in Central Ohio that provides Meals on Wheels. Chuck Gehring, the head of Life Care Alliance, believes very strongly that if he is truly to meet his mission, anyone who asks for Meals on Wheels should get it for free. And there should be no waiting list. In fact, Life Care Alliance is the only Meals on Wheels program in the state of Ohio that has no waiting list. But Meals on Wheels loses money. So what did Chuck Gehring do? He thought place, person, and price. To do a successful Meals on Wheels program, he had to be very good at logistics, to deliver the right meal to the right address at the right time. And he knew that he had to be very good on packaging, so cold stays cold and hot stays hot. And he knew he had to run a kitchen that could run on USDA nutrition standards, which is one of the requirements of Meals on Wheels. Well, he said, if I can do that for homebound low-income individuals who need a meal delivered, I can do this for homebound higher-income individuals that can afford to pay for the meal and give me some profit. So he did that. Using the same skills, he changed the place, the person, and the price in order to create a mission-related but profitable enterprise to help support his Meals on Wheels program. But he didn't stop there. He said, well, when the trucks leave at noontime to deliver these meals, how can I provide a job for my kitchen employees in the afternoon? And he said, well, if I can deliver an off-site meal in a package, I can deliver an off-site meal in a steam table. And I can do it in the afternoon. And what he started was a corporate catering business called LA Catering. LA Catering is not closely related to his mission of providing meals to low-income individuals. So he decided it had to target a much higher profit rate. In fact, what we'd like to see is the activities of a sustainable nonprofit go from the upper left-hand side towards the lower right-hand side. But he didn't stop there. He said, I can put my steam tables in my own location and provide a cafeteria for my employees and the employees in the businesses in our neighborhood because they're all having to brown bag it. So he started 3 profit-making enterprises from the core skills of his mission-oriented activity. Let me give you another example. AIDS Resource Center Ohio was created in order to run a resource center. They have a clinic, they help people deal with AIDS, and they write prescriptions. And as with most mission-related adventures, it doesn't cover all of its costs. But what they said was, what they noticed rather, was when they gave a prescription to an individual at their clinic, some went 2 doors down and went to their pharmacy where they provided the medications at low or no cost. But many of the individuals took their prescriptions and went over to CVS and Walgreens. And the AIDS Resource Center said, whoa, why don't we start a pharmacy? Well, they did what any new startup business would do. They looked around and saw who else was doing it. And they found in Wisconsin was a similar organization that started a pharmacy, and they went to talk to them and saw their business plan. Then AIDS Resource Center put together a business plan, did a site location study, started looking at how long it would take them to be profitable, what kind of capital they needed to be able to run the pharmacy until it was profitable, because no new business is profitable in its first month, its first quarter, or usually not even in its first year. And they put that together, and they got financing, and they started a pharmacy. And after just 2 years, they're bringing in almost $1 million a year to support their mission activity. They captured the business of those who could pay. And that's something to think about as you think about social enterprise. Am I subsidizing people who don't need a subsidy? If I am, let me save the subsidies for those who can't afford it and see if I can structure a new component of my business to get those who can pay to actually fund it. Now, one of the things we're doing at the Center for Social Enterprise Development is we're assembling business profiles of social enterprises that are currently in business. And I'd like to show you two profiles to give you an example of what a startup business looks like versus one that's fairly established. Let's begin with a brand new startup called Hot Chicken Takeover. It's unbelievably popular here in Central Ohio. What you'll see is their logo and a description of what they do. They're actually not profitable yet, but they are what we call cash flow positive. That is, they're now able to bring in enough cash each week to cover this week's expenses. They're providing a payroll to a group of very difficult to employ individuals. People who are homeless, formerly incarcerated, people who have been unemployed for a long time and need a lot of help in learning all of what we call the soft skills. Showing up to work on time, knowing how to follow sanitation standards, being responsible, being courteous, being customer oriented. They've been very successful. They were able to start up because they got some debt. They have a lot of inventory and their vendors were willing to give them loans to cover inventory, and they did crowdfunding. Crowdfunding, if for those of you not familiar, is a relatively popular way to get individuals to make small donations in exchange for some token thing. For people who gave money to Hot Chicken Takeover, they got a t-shirt. But he raised over $64,000 to do that. And he's had a fairly high payroll for that. So his social impact is clear. He provides jobs to people that wouldn't be employed by a typical business. His startup capital was put together by multiple sources. And he is approaching his business in the way that any ambitious business would do. Advertising, promotion, making sure that people really want to do it. In fact, one of his business plans is to always make sure the lines are long at his. He's not expanding so fast that he has extra space. He wants people to say, wow, this is really popular. Soon you'll be able to see profiles of many social enterprises at our website, www.cincohio.com. Check in from time to time to see the examples grow. Well, before I move on, let me show you an example of one more. Pearl Interactive Network has been in business for a long time, since 2004, and it's pretty large. It's a $12.5 million business, but it's a social enterprise. It started to provide jobs to homebound disabled veterans, people who have served our country, were seriously wounded, are not able to leave their houses for various reasons of their disability, but they still have to make a living. And they basically used modern technology to be able to set up call centers where you could be part of a call center while working at your own computer in your own home on your own telephone. This one started with a government grant, the way many nonprofits start, but their focus was to use it to develop a business that could pay for itself. And right now, they're a very profitable business in a very competitive field of call center management. Why were they successful? Because they looked at a government program and they figured out how to make it easier for businesses to meet their hiring preferences for disabled veterans and individuals. Now think about it for you. Our businesses have requirements to try to be able to get certain targets for minority or female hiring? Are you able to make it easier for a business to be able to meet those requirements? Well, I've given you an awful lot of examples of social enterprises and how they think about it. And you're probably saying, well, that's great, they started it, but I have no idea where to start. Well, let me talk you through how it works in other areas. And to do that, frankly, we're copying the model that has basically been used by the high technology field for decades. The first thing that's really important is to be able to do outreach, so people know about it and know how to engage and know have an idea. This webinar that you're participating in is a good example of our effort to do outreach so people know about social enterprise and have ideas on how they can participate and how they can get engaged. And I would be happy to talk to your board, your organization, or anyone. Just contact us at our website that you see below, and I'll be happy to come to speak to your group at absolutely no charge. But then you need to know the basics. So you need to have someone providing workshops that can show you about what it means to start a business. What are the skills? How do you develop your idea? Is your idea viable? Where do you take it to the next stage? And that's one thing that the center does, and you go to our website and see our workshops, which will resume in the fall to do that. Boot camps is a concept that's a military word, but it's been embraced by the high technology world, and we're happy to embrace it. A boot camp is once your idea is developed, rather than work on it forever, never sure if it really has legs, you spend an intense 2 days really drilling deeply to kind of see if it really does have a market that can support it. Why do I say have a market that support it? Because in order for our business to be successful, we have to know how large it needs to be in order to be profitable. There's a such thing as being too small. And once we identify the size we need in order to be profitable, we have to know if the market's large enough in order to give us enough business for that to work. So we run boot camps to do that. Any new business needs mentoring. There's no successful businessman or businesswoman who did it all by themselves. They always had someone they could go to for advice, for counsel, for referrals, for suggestions on who they could get to help them out, to find good employees for their business. One of the other things that's really important is practice pitch sessions, because we're all used to writing grant proposals. But pitching to an investor to make them be willing to give us their money for our business is a totally different undertaking. So you need to practice. So you're really to make you ready to talk to investors. Well, after that, here's the key piece you have to have. You have to have investment capital. And generally, it's not going to come from a bank. So we need to provide sources of investment capital. Now, how does this work in practice? Well, in the social enterprise space, there's a lot of efforts that try to do one, but don't try to do everything. There's those that do at the top of the page where they really work on the outreach, the mentoring, and the pitch sessions. On the chart, you see some examples from out of state and 2 examples here in the state of Ohio, in Cincinnati and Cleveland. But helping someone develop a business isn't enough. You really need to provide investment capital. But at the same time, many of the biggest impact investment funds don't have a program to develop businesses. And I give you some names of them on the bottom of the chart, but the number I really want you to focus on is the fact that because these 2 parts aren't linked together, 70% of all the capital that's raised for social enterprises in the United States goes to social enterprises outside the United States. And if we're really going to make our local nonprofits sustainable, we need to make it so the local capital will find a local social enterprise to invest in. So we're trying to build what's actually ideal, a community investment network. And that's in fact how we got the name for our umbrella, CINCO, the Community Investment Network of Central Ohio. And the Center for Social Enterprise Development is our 501c3 component to provide the training, the outreach, the workshop, the boot camps, the mentoring, and the pitch sessions. What we also have that we've established so far in Central Ohio, and would be happy to bring it more broadly in the state, is there are now 3 sources of social impact investment. The Columbus Foundation has a program. The Cincinnati Foundation, Greater Cincinnati Foundation has a program. There's some emerging programs up in Cleveland. The oldest is the Cleveland Foundation. The most active foundation in the state of Ohio is the Tony R. Wells Foundation, which is located here in the suburbs of Columbus. And we're working to form a fund that can be available to individuals and corporations called the Cinco Fund in order to link these 2 things together. Now, I'm sure you have many, many questions to do that. I encourage you to find out more by going to our website, which you'll see on the screen before you. We have a blog that puts out information about social enterprise with lots of links to resources and thoughts and issues in the social enterprise space. If you're into Twitter, we tweet. But you also are most welcome to send an email to us with any of your questions or to telephone us. And I think we have some questions that have come up that we can address. So why don't we go to that? Lily, what questions have come up so far?
All right, we're going to have Daniel, who is going to be addressing the questions that we have. For some of you, if you're having any issues connecting to the Google account, or you may not have a Gmail account, you can also visit OSHLA's Facebook page or find us on Twitter and submit your questions through those 2 modes that we will be also checking as well. So we do have a series of questions here for our presenter, and let me introduce you to Daniel.
Thank you. So we're going to start off really quickly. What is the impact on the community image when a traditional nonprofit starts venturing into a social enterprise?
That's a really good question. And while your worry is probably the donors will say, well, you don't need our help anymore, or you've forgotten why you exist. But the reality is your donors will actually be more supportive of you because they will see that you are trying to make it work too. You're not depending entirely on the donors. And for your other individuals in the community, it's important to tell the story and why I showed you that grid. We are doing this to make money so we can do even more for the community. We are using the money we make not to pay shareholders, not to pay bigger salaries, not to make ourselves rich. We are putting this back into the community. You go to a Goodwill store, they make a lot of money. Do you go to the store because you think it gives you a good deal? Do you not go there because they're making money? You go there because you know the money, your business you give them is for a good cause. So that's the story, is you have to tell them why you're doing it, and you have to tell them how you're doing it. Or tell them, look at the people we're providing jobs that no one else would hire. Isn't this making our community better? And measure it. Give them the data. That example I gave you from Hot Chicken Takeover. They're providing weekly payroll of $9,000 to people that otherwise would be on food stamps, welfare, or perhaps trying to figure out how turning to crime in order to make some money, or turning to prostitution in order to pay their bills. What other questions do we have, Daniel?
Does a nonprofit organization need a special license or permit in order to tie a fee to an existing program or service?
No, actually it doesn't. Believe it or not, there is nothing in the IRS code that says you can't have a profit. It's just unfortunate that we use the word nonprofit. In the IRS code, you're called a charitable organization. There's only 2 requirements for a charitable organization. One is that the bulk of your senior management's time and your board's time is focused on the mission activity. and that if you're doing something that is not closely related to your mission, you pay taxes like any business. Zambezi Bay pays income tax, just like any for-profit business does. So you have many options in order to how to organize. What I suggest is, rather than investigate the legal structure at the beginning, put together your business concept, build a business plan, and then in discussions with your accountants and your attorneys, you can decide the best structure. Some are just run as programs in their nonprofits, like the Goodwill stores. Some are run as subsidiaries that are nonprofit. Some are run as subsidiaries that are for profit, and some that are run independently. So you have all the options necessary. So you don't need any special license. If you do form a subsidiary, you will have to organize it at least as an LLC. That takes 20 minutes on the Secretary of State's website and won't cost you even $100. What's the next question?
Would you be able to provide some examples of dual business models on a smaller scale?
I wish I could bring up our website. There are over 61 that are smaller scale, and if you go to our website, you can see a list of at least 29 that do that. I can give you an example of the Bindu project. Sells medallions and jewelry, and the profits from every sale goes to a dedicated nonprofit. There's a restaurant called Double Comfort that says buy a meal, give a meal. And so for every meal that they sell in their restaurant, they don't make a donation to support a meal through the Mid-Ohio Food Bank. I could go on and on and on, but as you start looking at our profiles as we post them on our website, you'll see them. I'd say most of the startups, most of the social enterprises right now in this state are at the startup stage. That is, they have revenues of under $100,000. They're still building their business. So I think the most important thing as you investigate social enterprise is to say, what do I need to make a difference? Because what I don't want you to do is to start a business whose potential is only to make you maybe $5,000, which really won't help you substantially help your mission. So while you don't have to be big and huge like Pearl Interactive Network, I don't want you to spend a lot of time on something that's too small. So that's why we really encourage you to come to workshops. We'll be offering one here in Columbus through the commission on June 11th. Come to that and see a good introduction of what it takes in order to start a social enterprise. So you kind of see, is this hill a hill we can climb, or are we not ready for it? Or what are the steps we're going to have to go through? Another question.
All right. What might be a good idea for Latino serving organizations to convert into a profitable venture? There's a lot of interpreting services, case management, workforce development, and things in that area. What are some examples you might have?
Well, actually, interpreting is an excellent example. One of the best ways to see if there's a social enterprise potential is to look and see if there are for-profit businesses already providing it. Now, you shouldn't say, well, if a business is there, I should steer clear, because one of the biggest risks in starting a new business is that there isn't a market. There are many more ideas than there are viable businesses. So if someone has already started a business, you know there's a market. So what's your niche? You may not only be providing interpretation, but you may also be an expert in an area of specialty where a typical interpreter might not know that vocabulary so well. Oftentimes, just look at what you're doing and say, can I do it in a different place, for a different person, at a different price? I'm doing it for poor people. The rich people need it as well. Oftentimes, we're focusing on the low-income Latino community. There are a middle-class and upper-class Latino community. What do they need? Maybe they would really like to give business to an organization that is supporting low-income Latinos.
What would you say is the biggest barrier with a board when you introduce the idea of social entrepreneurship?
Fear. Boards don't like risk. Boards are oftentimes the biggest impediment to starting a business. So it's absolutely critical that you have your board be part of the conversation from the beginning. One of the main goals of the workshop we're giving on June 11th is frankly for board members to help them understand how they should think about risk, because frankly, while starting a new business has risk, running your nonprofit at a perpetual loss has a guaranteed risk. You will disappear. Boards often are made up of people who have not started a business, so they don't have personal experience with it. So when you look at starting a business, think about bringing into your working group, your task force, your impact team, people in the neighborhood, in your community who have started a business. Someone who runs a local grocery store has tried to start a business. They will have knowledge that can be helpful to you, even if you're not trying to start a grocery store. Just starting a business is a valuable experience. So include people that are not on your board to help do that, and always keep the board clued in and involve them.
What is the success rate for this type of venture? Do smaller nonprofits usually involve a for-profit aspect to their business?
A startup is a startup. Many startups really don't succeed. The reason most startups don't succeed is they started with ideas that shouldn't have been started in the first place. That's why it's very, very important to go through that sequence of steps we talked about, the workshops, the boot camps, the mentoring, the pitches, because in the high-tech world, they have a phrase, fail early and fail often. What that really means is work your idea, but have a quick way to know if it's going to work. Most startups fail because they persisted with an idea that wasn't a good one. So I'd say most of the social enterprises that are already operating for the last several years were started within a nonprofit who could self-fund. We're trying to change it so that small nonprofits can get outside capital to start a social enterprise. And many are starting freestanding. In fact, the younger generation, the millennial generation, that's all they want to do is work for a social enterprise or start a social enterprise. But the key to not failing is to drop a bad idea sooner rather than later. And we can help you figure out if your idea is a good one from a business point of view.
All right, and we have time for one more question. For people who haven't actually started a nonprofit yet, do you have any advice as to what would be a good way to go about that?
Well, my best advice before starting a nonprofit is to make sure you really need to start a nonprofit. Is there one that already exists that you can work with and join with? Many times we start a nonprofit because we fell in love with our idea and don't think we like someone else's idea. But if you do want to start a nonprofit, go to the Ohio Secretary of State's website, and they give you all the steps in order to how to form it. But you will need to work with a qualified attorney to fill out the very complicated Form 1023 application to be a nonprofit. So actually, one of my biggest suggestions when people talk about social enterprise is first see what your business idea is. Maybe you should start as a for-profit, not as a nonprofit. There are a lot of really good for-profit social enterprises that are doing wonderful things for our community. And sometimes that's the easier path. But find out what you want to do, how you want to do it. Then we can talk about if you should start a nonprofit or not. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to turn this back to Lily Kavanaugh, who will tell you more about your next steps.
Thank you so much, Mr. Proctor, and we appreciate all the very, very valuable information you have shared with us today. And as he mentioned, we definitely want to make sure that all of you who are interested in being part of our June 11th workshop on social entrepreneurship, please call our office 614-466-8333 or visit our webpage where we will be posting information about how to get registered for this very important workshop. The workshop on June the 11th will be free, and it will be an incredible opportunity for you to follow up and to work with Mr. Proctor and his team on evaluating some of these opportunities. So, as we bring today's webinar to a close, I want to remind you of the important Latino community events that the Commission will be hosting here during the summer months. We'll be working on the Latino Health Summit scheduled for Friday, August the 14th, and Agenda Latina will be taking place on Friday, September the 25th. Make sure that you stay in touch with us through social media, through our website, and stay tuned as we try to continue to bring you valuable information to help you grow the capacity and the leadership of Latino serving organizations in Ohio. On behalf of the Ohio Latino Affairs Commission and our presenter, Mr. Alan Proctor, I want to thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful afternoon.